I'm 35, a loving mother to my 8-year-old son, Marcus. I adopted him as a newborn after years of struggling with infertility. When the family reunion invitation arrived, my excitement turned to disbelief at my parents' words, "Leave Marcus at home, adopted children aren't real family members." Their prejudice awakened a protective fury I never knew existed. This would become the battle for my son's rightful place in our family tree. Let me know where you're watching from and hit that like and subscribe button before we continue. If you've ever had to defend someone you love, you'll understand what comes next. The reunion invitation arrived on a Tuesday, nestled between bills and advertisements in my mailbox. It was cream-coloured with gold embossed lettering typical of my mother's elegant taste. The Johnson family reunion, scheduled for the last weekend of July, promised to be the biggest gathering in years. Cousins from across the country would be attending, many of whom I hadn't seen since childhood. I remember smiling as I read it, immediately thinking how excited Marcus would be. My son loved meeting new people, and at 8 years old, he was at that perfect age, curious about everything, full of questions, and still innocent enough to see the good in everyone. I pictured him playing with the other kids, being doted on by aunts and uncles, and maybe even finding cousins close to his age. I called my mother that evening to confirm our attendance. Marcus was already in bed, and I was enjoying a rare quiet moment with a glass of wine and my thoughts. "Mum, we got the invitation today. Marcus is going to be thrilled. He's never met most of the family." There was a pause on the other end of the line, longer than normal for my usually quick-witted mother. "About that Amanda?" She began, her voice taking on that formal tone she used when delivering unwelcome news. "Your father and I have been talking, and we think it might be best if Marcus sits this one out." I nearly dropped my wine glass. "What do you mean?" "Well, you know how traditional some of the older relatives are. Aunt Gertrude and Uncle Frank especially. This is a family reunion, Amanda. For family." The implication hung in the air between us, unspoken but unmistakable. "Marcus's family," I said, my voice steady despite the anger rising in my chest. "You know what I mean, dear," my mother continued, her voice falsely pleasant. "He's not a Johnson by blood. This reunion is about celebrating our shared heritage, our shared DNA. I'm just trying to avoid an uncomfortable situation for everyone." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. In the 5 years since I'd adopted Marcus, my parents had been polite but distant with him. They remembered his birthday with impersonal gift cards and made brief appearances at his school events, but they never showed him the same affection they showed my sister's children who shared their precious Johnson DNA. "He's my son," I said, each word deliberate. "If he's not welcome, then neither am I." "Don't be dramatic, Amanda," my mother sighed. "You're a Johnson. Of course you should be there. I'm just suggesting that your arrangement with Marcus is separate from our family gathering." "My arrangement?" I nearly shouted. "He's my son, not a timeshare property." "Lower your voice," she snapped. "This is exactly the kind of scene I'm trying to avoid at the reunion. Your father agrees with me, by the way. It would just make everyone more comfortable if you came alone." I hung up without saying goodbye, something I'd never done before in my life. My hands were shaking as I set down the phone. How could they still see Marcus as somehow less than family after all these years? And how dare they ask me to exclude him from a family event, as though he was some awkward appendage I could leave at home. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept picturing Marcus's face if I tried to explain why he couldn't come with me to meet his extended family. The confusion, the hurt in those big brown eyes of his. It was unthinkable. By morning, my sadness had hardened into resolve. If my parents couldn't accept my son as their grandson, their real grandson, then they would have to deal with the consequences. The next morning, I went through the motions of our usual routine, making breakfast, helping Marcus pick out clothes that somewhat matched checking his backpack for homework. But inside, I was seething. The conversation with my mother played on repeat in my head. While Marcus ate his cereal, I studied his face. The way his eyebrows furrowed in concentration as he read the back of the cereal box. The dimple that appeared in his left cheek when he smiled. The cowlick in his dark hair that refused to stay down, no matter how much water I smoothed on it. He was perfect. He was mine. He was family. "Hey, buddy," I said casually. "Would you like to go to a big party with lots of people from Mummy's side of the family? There would be other kids there to play with." His eyes lit up. "Like a birthday party?" "Kind of, but bigger. It's called a family reunion. Would Grandma and Grandpa be there? And can I bring my new Lego set to show them?" The innocent question twisted something inside me. Marcus adored his grandparents despite their coolness toward him. Every visit, every phone call, he tried so hard to win their affection, showing them his drawings, his school projects, his toys, anything to make them proud of him, to make them love him. "We'll see," was all I could manage to say. "Finish up your breakfast or we'll be late for school." After dropping Marcus off, I called in sick to work something I rarely did. I needed time to think, to plan. This wasn't just about a family reunion anymore. This was about setting boundaries for how my son would be treated. I drove to my sister Jessica's house. If anyone would understand my anger, it would be her. Jessica had always been the rebel in the family, challenging our parents' old-fashioned views, while I typically played the role of peacekeeper. Jessica answered the door in sweatpants, her blonde hair piled on top of her head in a messy bun. Her youngest 3-year-old Lily peeked out from behind her legs. "Auntie Mandy," Lily squealed, launching herself at me. I picked her up and hugged her tight, breathing in her sweet baby shampoo smell. "Hey, Lily Pad, is it okay if Auntie Mandy talks to your mum for a bit?" Jessica took one look at my face and sent Lily to play in her room. "What happened?" she asked, guiding me to the kitchen and starting the coffee maker. I told her everything. The invitation, the phone call, the implication that Marcus wasn't real family. Those self-righteous, antiquated... Jessica didn't finish the sentence, mindful of Lily, who might overhear. "I can't believe they actually said that to you. Actually, I can believe it, and that's even worse." "What should I do, Jess? I can't go without him, but I also don't want him to face rejection from his own grandparents." Jessica's face softened. "How's Marcus handling all this? Does he know?" "No, I haven't told him anything yet. He's so excited about meeting family, though. This morning he asked if he could bring his Lego set to show them." My voice cracked slightly. Jessica reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Listen to me. Marcus is your son in every way that matters. If Mom and Dad can't see that it's their loss, not his, and not yours." "But what do I do about the reunion?" Jessica thought for a moment, sipping her coffee. "You have 2 options. Skip it entirely, which sends a message but also punishes you and Marcus. Or go together and force them to deal with it. Make them face their prejudice head on. What would you do?" "You know me, I'd probably show up with Marcus in a rainbow flag just to give Dad a heart attack." She laughed. "But seriously, Amanda, this is about more than just one event. This is about establishing how your family, your real family, which includes Marcus, will be treated going forward." "They're his only grandparents," I said quietly. "His birth mother's parents aren't in the picture, and I'm not exactly swimming in family members to give him. I wanted him to have grandparents who adored him. Then maybe it's time to show them what they're missing. Marcus is an amazing kid. Anyone who spends 5 minutes with him can see that. Maybe they just need more time with him." Jessica's words stayed with me as I drove home. Maybe she was right. Maybe I needed to force the issue to make my parents see Marcus as their grandson, not just as my adopted son. That afternoon, I called my father at work, something I rarely did. My father, Dr. Richard Johnson, was a respected cardiologist who prized his privacy and professional reputation above almost everything else. "Amanda?" he answered, clearly surprised by my call. "Is everything all right?" "No, Dad, everything is not all right," I said firmly. "Mum told me last night that Marcus isn't welcome at the family reunion. I want to hear your side of this." There was a sigh on the other end. "Your mother can sometimes be blunt in her delivery, but her intentions are good. This reunion is important, Amanda. Many of these relatives haven't seen each other in decades. It's about celebrating the Johnson legacy. And Marcus isn't part of that legacy. Is that what you're saying?" "You're putting words in my mouth. Of course we care about the boy. His name is Marcus, Dad. Your grandson's name is Marcus." "Amanda," his voice took on the patronizing tone that had intimidated me throughout childhood. "Adoption is a wonderful thing you've done, a charitable act, but surely you understand it's different from biological family connections. The blood ties that bind our family go back generations. So Lily, Ethan, and Sophie are your real grandchildren, but Marcus isn't, is that it?" I pressed naming Jessica's children. "I didn't say that. You didn't have to. It's been clear from day one. The way you dote on them but barely acknowledge Marcus. The way you call him the boy instead of your grandson. The difference in Christmas presents in attention and love. He notices Dad. He's 8, not blind. Now you're being emotional," my father said dismissively. "This isn't about love or presents. It's about a private family event where we're celebrating shared ancestry. I don't understand why this is so difficult for you to grasp." "Because it's wrong," I said simply. And I never thought I'd have to explain that to my own father. I ended the call feeling both angry and sad. My parents, the people who had raised me to believe in fairness and kindness, were drawing a line between their grandchildren based on genetics. It was so contrary to everything I thought they stood for that I struggled to reconcile the disconnect. That evening, as Marcus and I worked on a puzzle together at the dining room table, I studied his face again. The concentration in his eyes, the gentle way he handled the puzzle pieces, the patience he showed when something didn't fit right away. How could anyone not love this child? How could anyone, especially my own parents, see him as less than family? "Mum," Marcus asked, looking up from the puzzle. "Are you okay? You look sad." I smiled, pushing away my troubled thoughts. "I'm fine, buddy. Just thinking about how lucky I am to be your mum." He grinned, revealing the gap where his front tooth had fallen out the week before. "I'm lucky too. Can we have pizza for dinner?" As simple as that, from family drama to pizza in the span of seconds. The resilience of children never ceased to amaze me. "Pizza sounds perfect," I agreed, ruffling his hair. As we ate dinner later, I made a decision. We would attend the reunion together. My parents would have to face their prejudice, and the entire extended family would meet the newest Johnson blood relation or not. Over the next week, I tried calling both my parents several times, but they either didn't answer or cut the conversation short with excuses about being busy. It was their classic avoidance strategy when faced with conflict: retreat and pretend everything is fine until the problem goes away. But I wasn't going away, and neither was Marcus. On Saturday morning, I decided a direct approach was necessary. Marcus had a playdate with his friend from down the street, giving me a few hours to drive to my parents' house unannounced. Their home, the same one I'd grown up in, sat on a tree-lined street in an affluent neighborhood. The brick colonial with its manicured lawn and precise landscaping reflected my parents' perfectly traditional proper, concerned with appearances. My mother answered the door in gardening gloves, clearly surprised to see me. "Amanda, I wasn't expecting you today." "That was the idea," I said, stepping past her into the foyer. "We need to talk, and you and Dad have been avoiding my calls." She sighed, pulling off her gloves. "Your father's in his study. Let me get him." The living room hadn't changed in 20 years, the same formal furniture, the same family photos on the mantel. I walked over to look at them while waiting. There were several of me and Jessica growing up, our school photos, graduation pictures. There were newer ones of Jessica with her husband and children. And then I noticed something that made my blood boil. On the end table was a silver frame I'd given them 2 Christmases ago. It had held a professional photo of Marcus and me taken for his 6th birthday. Now it contained a landscape picture of the lake house where we vacationed every summer. My mother returned with my father, catching me staring at the repurposed frame. "Where's the picture of Marcus and me?" I asked without preamble. My mother at least had the decency to look embarrassed. "Oh, I must have moved it during spring cleaning. I'm sure it's around here somewhere." "Don't lie to me," I said quietly. "You removed it, didn't you? You removed my son from your family displays." My father stepped forward. "Amanda, don't speak to your mother that way. We didn't come down to your house and demand an audience, so I expect you to show some respect in ours." "Respect?" I laughed without humour. "You want to talk about respect while you're erasing my child from this family? There isn't a single photo of Marcus anywhere in this house, is there?" They exchanged a look that confirmed my suspicion. "Let's sit down and discuss this calmly," my father suggested, gesturing to the formal living room furniture that had always been more for show than comfort. I remained standing. "I'll be brief. Marcus and I will be attending the family reunion together as mother and son, as members of this family. If that's a problem for either of you, or for Aunt Gertrude or anyone else, then you'll have to deal with it. I won't hide my son or pretend he doesn't exist to make anyone comfortable in their prejudice." My mother perched on the edge of the sofa. "Amanda, you're making this into something it isn't. No one is denying that you care for Marcus." "Love?" I corrected. "I love Marcus. He's my son." "Fine, love," she conceded with a wave of her hand. "But surely you can understand how confusing it might be for the relatives who haven't seen you in years to suddenly meet this child who doesn't look anything like us, who doesn't share our features or heritage." "So this is about race?" I asked, stunned by her candour. "Because Marcus is half black, he doesn't fit your image of a Johnson. Don't put words in your mother's mouth," my father interjected. "This isn't about race, it's about family continuity, about shared genetics. The Johnson family has a proud lineage dating back to—" "I don't care if the Johnsons came over on the Mayflower," I interrupted. "Family is about love, not DNA. Marcus is my son. That makes him a Johnson, whether his skin matches yours or not." My mother stood up, smoothing her slacks in that nervous gesture she'd had for as long as I could remember. Perhaps we should compromise. You could bring Marcus to the Saturday picnic portion of the reunion, but not to the formal dinner on Sunday where the family history will be discussed. That seems reasonable, doesn't it? I stared at her, unable to believe what I was hearing. Reasonable. You want me to bring my child to the casual part of the weekend, but exclude him from the important part, so he can be the help, but not family. That's not what she meant, my father said sharply. It's exactly what she meant, I countered. You're suggesting my son is good enough to attend the backyard barbecue, but not good enough for the fancy dinner where the real family matters are discussed. Do you have any idea how insulting that is? You're being difficult on purpose, my mother complained. We're trying to find a middle ground. There is no middle ground when it comes to accepting my child, I said firmly. Either you recognize him as your grandson fully, completely, at all events, in all family photos, with all the love and attention you give to your other grandchildren, or you don't. And if you don't, then you're choosing not to have a relationship with me either. The ultimatum hung in the air between us. My father's face hardened. He had never responded well to being backed into a corner. I think you should leave, he said coldly. When you're ready to discuss this rationally, without emotional blackmail, give us a call. Emotional blackmail, I repeated incredulously. I'm asking you to love your grandson. If that feels like blackmail to you, then you have a bigger problem than I thought. I left their house feeling shaky but resolved. For years, I'd made excuses for their behavior toward Marcus. They were from a different generation. They needed time to adjust. They showed love differently. But standing in that living room, seeing the empty picture frame, hearing their thinly veiled prejudice laid bare, I couldn't make excuses anymore. On the drive home, my phone rang. It was Jessica. How'd it go? She asked, already knowing where I'd been. About as well as you'd expect. I sighed, then filled her in on the conversation. Those stubborn, narrow-minded, she muttered. What's your plan now? We're going to the reunion, I said with determination. All of it. The picnic, the dinner, everything. They can either deal with it or make a scene in front of the entire extended family. Bold move, Jessica said approvingly. Need backup, I can make sure Ethan and Lily spend extra time with Marcus, show everyone their cousins, regardless of what Mum and Dad think. Thanks, Jess. That would be perfect. After hanging up, I felt a surge of gratitude for my sister. At least Marcus had one relative besides me who saw him for who he was. A sweet, smart, wonderful little boy who deserved to be loved unconditionally. When I picked up Marcus from his playdate, he was full of stories about the video games he'd played and the snacks he'd eaten. As we drove home, he suddenly asked, Mom, do I have to wear a tie to the family party? I glanced at him in the rearview mirror. You mean the reunion? Why do you ask about a tie? He shrugged. Tommy had to wear a tie to his cousin's wedding, and he said it was like being choked by a snake all day. I laughed despite my tumultuous morning. No tie required for the picnic part, but there is a dinner that might be a bit dressier. We'll find you something comfortable, I promise. Will there be other kids my age? Tommy says family things are boring because it's just old people talking about other old people from a long time ago. The innocence of his question made my heart ache. He had no idea about the battle being waged over his right to attend, no concept of the rejection his own grandparents were trying to inflict. Yes, there will be kids there, your cousins Ethan and Lily for sure, and probably some others you haven't met yet. Cool, he said, easily satisfied. Then after a pause, Mom, are Grandma and Grandpa excited to see me at the reunion? I want to show Grandpa my new science book about space. He likes science stuff, right? I gripped the steering wheel tighter, choosing my words carefully. Grandpa does like science, and I'm sure once they see you there, they'll be very happy you came. It wasn't exactly a lie, but it wasn't the full truth either. I just couldn't bring myself to tell him that the grandparents he so desperately wanted to please were trying to exclude him from a family gathering. Some truths were too painful, especially for a child who had already faced the ultimate rejection from his birth mother. As we pulled into our driveway, I made a silent promise to Marcus. No matter what happened at the reunion, no matter how my parents or the extended family reacted, I would make sure he felt loved, included, and proud of who he was. If the Johnsons couldn't see what an amazing addition he was to their family tree, then we would start our own branch, one based on love rather than DNA. The 2 weeks leading up to the reunion were tense. My parents maintained radio silence, neither calling to apologize nor to continue the argument. I half expected an official disinvitation to arrive in the mail, but nothing came. Meanwhile, Marcus grew increasingly excited about the event. He asked daily how many more sleeps until the big family party, and had started making a list of questions to ask his relatives about what I was like as a kid. Did Mum ever get in trouble at school? He wrote in his wobbly handwriting. Was Mum afraid of thunderstorms like me? What was Mum's favourite food when she was 8? Each innocent question twisted the knife deeper. He was so eager to connect with his extended family, to find his place in the tapestry of our shared history. How could my parents not see that? How could they deny him that connection? Jessica called frequently, reporting that our parents had enlisted her in their campaign to make me see reason. They had called her multiple times, asking her to convince me to leave Marcus at home. I told them they were being ridiculous and prejudiced, she assured me. Dad actually hung up on me. Can you believe it? 70 years old and still hanging up the phone when he doesn't like what he's hearing. They're not going to change their minds, are they? I asked, a heaviness settling in my chest. Probably not before the reunion, Jessica admitted. But that doesn't mean they won't change eventually. Remember how they were when I married Daniel? They hated that he was Jewish. Made all those comments about our children being confused about their identity. Now they adore him and have a menorah alongside their Christmas tree every December. That's different, I argued. Daniel is still white, still educated, still fits most of their criteria for an acceptable addition to the family. Marcus is... I trailed off, not wanting to reduce my son to demographic categories. Different in a more visible way, Jessica finished for me. I know, but the principle is the same. They adjusted once, they can adjust again. I wasn't convinced. The few times my parents had interacted with Marcus, there had been a palpable discomfort, a stiffness that never thawed. They called him the boy, or Amanda's son, rather than their grandson. They patted him awkwardly on the head like he was a dog, rather than hugging him like they did Jessica's children. The weekend before the reunion, I took Marcus shopping for new clothes. He needed something nice for the formal dinner, and I was determined that he would look as much a part of the family as any other Johnson grandchild. At the department store, he immediately gravitated toward a bright blue blazer. This one, Mum, it's my favourite colour. The blazer was indeed a vibrant royal blue, nothing like the subdued navy or grey that the Johnson men typically wore to formal occasions. My father would probably see it as further evidence that Marcus didn't fit in with the family aesthetic. I reached for a more conservative navy option, then stopped myself. Why should Marcus dim his brightness to please people who didn't accept him anyway? You're right that blue is perfect for you, I said, adding it to our cart, along with a crisp white shirt and khaki pants. At home, Marcus insisted on trying on his new outfit right away, parading around the living room like a runway model and making me laugh, despite my anxiety about the upcoming weekend. Do I look like a Johnson now, Mum? He asked innocently, adjusting his collar in the mirror. The question caught me off guard. Had he somehow picked up on the undercurrents of tension? Had he overheard one of my conversations with Jessica? You've always been a Johnson, I told him firmly. From the moment I became your mum, you became a Johnson. The clothes don't make you family, love does. He nodded, accepting the simple truth with the ease that only children seem capable of. Can I wear my light-up sneakers with this? For the picnic, absolutely. For the dinner, we might need to go with the new loafers. Oh man, he groaned dramatically, flopping onto the couch. Fancy shoes are the worst. I ruffled his hair. Such suffering you endure. How about ice cream to make up for the fancy shoe torture? His face lit up, fashion concerns forgotten. With sprinkles. Is there any other way? As we sat at the kitchen table eating ice cream sundaes, Marcus suddenly asked, Mum, why don't Grandma and Grandpa come to my school stuff like Lily and Ethan's Grandma and Grandpa do? I nearly choked on my ice cream. What do you mean, buddy? Well, when Ethan had his soccer tournament, Grandma and Grandpa were there with a big sign and everything. But they didn't come to my science fair, even though I invited them. He swirled his spoon through the melting ice cream, not looking at me. Don't they like science projects? My heart broke a little. So he had noticed the discrepancy in treatment after all. Children always saw more than we gave them credit for. Grandma and Grandpa are... I searched for words that wouldn't hurt him but wouldn't lie either. They're still learning how to be your grandparents. Sometimes older people take longer to adjust to new family members. Because I'm adopted. He asked, the word sounding extra heavy in his young voice. How did you know that word? I asked, surprised. We had always been open about his adoption. He knew his story, knew he grew in another woman's belly, but was always meant to be my son. But we rarely used the technical term. Tyler at school said I'm adopted. He said it means I'm not really your son. His voice was small, uncertain. Anger flashed through me at Tyler, at my parents, at a world that would make my child question his place in it. "Marcus, look at me," I said firmly. "You are really and truly my son. Adoption is just the way you came to me, but it doesn't make you any less my child than if you had grown in my belly. Some families are made through birth and some are made through adoption, but all real families are made through love. And I have loved you from the very first moment I held you in my arms." "But Grandma and Grandpa don't love me the same as Lily and Ethan," he persisted with the uncomfortable directness of children. I took a deep breath. "They love you in their own way, but they're still learning. And that's their problem, not yours. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you or that you're not just as much a part of this family as your cousins." He seemed to consider this, then asked, "Is that why you were arguing with them on the phone about the reunion?" So he had overheard something. "Yes," I admitted. "But it's all sorted out now. We're going to the reunion, and everyone's going to meet you, and they're going to see what an amazing Johnson you are. Even if I don't look like a Johnson," he asked, touching his brown skin self-consciously. "Especially because you don't look like the other Johnsons," I assured him. "You're bringing something new and wonderful to the family, something that makes us better and more interesting than we were before." "Keke?" He smiled, seemingly satisfied with this explanation. "Can I have more sprinkles?" "Don't push your luck, kid." I laughed, relieved at his resilience. That night, after Marcus was asleep, I sat on the edge of his bed watching him breathe. The conversation about adoption had shaken me more than I let on. How dare my parents make him feel even slightly less than fully family? How dare anyone, classmates, relatives? Strangers question the legitimacy of our bond. Looking at his peaceful, sleeping face, I renewed my resolution. We would go to that reunion with our heads held high. We would face whatever reception awaited us, and we would do it together. And maybe, just maybe, seeing Marcus in person, hearing his laugh, witnessing his curiosity and kindness, would soften even the most tradition-bound Johnson hearts. But if it didn't, if they remained cold, if they made him feel unwelcome, then we would leave and never look back. I would create a new family tradition with Marcus, one built on acceptance and love, rather than outdated notions of bloodlines and heritage. With that decision firmly made, I kissed his forehead and whispered, "You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Marcus Johnson. Don't let anyone ever make you doubt that." The day of the reunion arrived hot and humid, typical July weather. The first event was an afternoon picnic at a local park, followed by the more formal dinner at a rented banquet hall that evening. As I helped Marcus button his new blue blazer that morning, I gave him a pep talk that was as much for me as for him. "Remember, you belong at this reunion just as much as anyone else there. You're a Johnson through and through. If anyone makes you feel otherwise, you come tell me right away, okay?" He nodded solemnly. "Okay, Mom. Can I bring my space book to show people?" "Of course you can." I smoothed down a stubborn cowlick in his hair. "Ready to go meet your family?" "Ready," he declared, grabbing his precious book from the bedside table. The drive to the park took 30 minutes, during which Marcus chatted excitedly about meeting relatives he'd only heard stories about. I tried to match his enthusiasm, but anxiety churned in my stomach. Would my parents make a scene? Would other relatives be cold to him? Would he notice if they were? The park came into view, a sprawling green space with playground equipment, picnic shelters, and a small lake. I could already see the Johnson family gathering a sea of people milling about under the largest shelter. Balloons in the Johnson family colours of blue and silver decorated the area. "Wow, that's a lot of people," Marcus commented as we parked. "Are they all our family?" "Most of them," I confirmed. "Remember, I have lots of cousins and many of them have kids of their own now." "So I have lots of cousins too," he asked, his eyes wide. "You sure do." As we approached the picnic area, I spotted Jessica and her family already there. She waved enthusiastically and hurried over to greet us. "There's my favourite nephew," she exclaimed, giving Marcus a big hug. "Ethan and Lily have been asking when you'd get here. They're over by the playground." Marcus looked at me for permission. "Can I go play with them, Mom?" "Go ahead," I smiled. "Just stay where I can see you." As he ran off, Jessica linked her arm through mine. "Mom and Dad are over by the drinks table. They've been watching the parking lot like hawks, probably hoping you'd take their advice and come alone." "Well, they're in for a disappointment," I said grimly. "Amanda?" a voice called out. I turned to see my cousin Rachel approaching. We had been close as children but had drifted apart in adulthood. "It's been forever, and is that your son I just saw run by? He's adorable." Her genuine warmth was like a balm. "Yes, that's Marcus. He's 8 now. 8 already, time flies. I can't wait to meet him properly. My Zoe is 7, they should get along great. As Rachel chatted about her daughter, I realized with relief that not everyone in the family would share my parents' prejudice. Some, like Rachel, would see Marcus as simply another child, another cousin, another Johnson. But that relief was short-lived. As Rachel moved on to greet other relatives, I saw my parents making their way toward me. My mother's smile was fixed and false, my father's expression unreadable. "Amanda, you made it?" my mother said, air-kissing my cheek. Her eyes darted to the playground where Marcus was clearly visible in his bright blue blazer. "And I see you brought him." "I brought my son," I corrected firmly. "Your grandson, Marcus." My father cleared his throat. "Let's not make a scene, Amanda. The important thing is that you're here with the family. My family includes Marcus." I stated loud enough that nearby relatives turned to look. "And if you can't acknowledge him as your grandson, then perhaps we should leave." My mother grabbed my arm, her nails digging in slightly. "Don't be dramatic. We're not asking you to leave. We're simply suggesting discretion." "Discretion?" I repeated incredulously. "What exactly does that mean, Mother? That I should pretend he's someone else's child? That I should keep him away from the family photos? That I should ask him to call you Mrs. Johnson instead of Grandma?" "Lower your voice," my father hissed. "People are staring." "Let them stare," I said, pulling my arm free from my mother's grip. "I'm done hiding. I'm done making excuses for your behavior. Marcus is my son, he's a Johnson, and he deserves to be treated with the same love and respect as any other child in this family." With that, I walked away, heading toward the playground where Marcus was happily playing with his cousins. Jessica, who had been watching the exchange from a distance, joined me. "Round 1 to Amanda," she murmured approvingly. "You okay?" I nodded, though my hands were shaking. "I just can't believe they're still pushing this. Even here, even now, they're trying to erase him." "They won't succeed," Jessica assured me. "Look around. People are already falling in love with him." She was right. Several relatives had gravitated to the playground watching the children play. Marcus, outgoing and friendly as always, was in his element, introducing himself to everyone, showing off his spacebook, asking questions about the family. "Are you really my mum's cousin?" I overheard him asking an elderly man I recognized as my father's cousin Walter. "What was she like when she was little? Did she like spacebooks too?" Walter chuckled, clearly charmed. "Your mum was always reading something or other. Smart as a whip, just like you seem to be. Those Johnson brains run strong." The irony of Walter's comment wasn't lost on me. Johnson brains apparently transcended DNA in his mind, while my parents couldn't see past it. The afternoon progressed relatively smoothly after that. My parents kept their distance, speaking to me only when necessary and avoiding Marcus entirely. But the rest of the family was largely welcoming. Some seemed confused about his place in the family tree. "Now he's your foster child?" one elderly aunt asked uncertainly, but most accepted him without question once I clarified he was my adopted son. Marcus, oblivious to the undercurrents of tension, was having the time of his life. He played games with his cousins, devoured picnic food, and collected stories about my childhood from amused relatives. As the picnic wound down and people began leaving to rest and change before the evening's formal dinner, I felt cautiously optimistic. Maybe this wouldn't be as bad as I'd feared. Maybe the extended family's acceptance would influence my parents. Jessica approached as Marcus and I were gathering our things. "So are you still coming to the dinner tonight?" she asked quietly. "Of course," I replied. "Why wouldn't we be?" She grimaced. "Dad's been talking to Uncle Frank." I overheard them discussing the family history presentation. Dad made it pretty clear he doesn't think Marcus should be there for it, since it's about blood heritage or some such nonsense. My momentary optimism deflated. "Well, that's too bad for Dad, because we're coming. Marcus is just as entitled to learn about his family history as any other Johnson grandchild." "That's my sister," Jessica smiled. "Give him hell." On the drive home, Marcus was full of stories about his new cousins and the relatives he'd met. "Aunt Jessica says we're going back tonight for a fancy dinner. Do I really have to wear the pinchy shoes?" "Yes, buddy, the fancy dinner means fancy shoes. But I promise, you can take them off under the table if they're uncomfortable." Cosine. He considered this compromise. "Deal. Mum, why were Grandma and Grandpa not talking to me today? Are they mad at me?" The direct question caught me off guard. "No, honey, they're not mad at you. They're not very good at talking to kids sometimes." "But they talk to Lily and Ethan," he pointed out with the unerring logic of a child. I sighed, searching for words that would be honest without being hurtful. "Marcus, Do you remember how we talked about how some people take longer to adjust to adoption? How some people don't understand right away that families can be made in different ways? He nodded. Grandma and Grandpa are still learning that. It doesn't mean they don't care about you, and it definitely doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. It just means they need more time to understand what I already know, that you're the most amazing son anyone could ask for. He seemed to accept this explanation, though a small furrow remained between his eyebrows. Will they be different at the fancy dinner? I hope so, I said, though I didn't believe it. But even if they're not, we have lots of other family who are excited to know you better. Cousin Rachel said her daughter Zoe can't wait to sit with you at dinner. This brightened his mood again, and by the time we arrived home, he was back to chattering excitedly about the evening ahead. As I helped him change into his dinner outfit, replacing the blue blazer he'd removed for the playground, with a freshly pressed version, I steeled myself for round 2. The formal dinner would be more intimate with fewer places to avoid awkward encounters. And if my parents truly tried to exclude Marcus from the family history presentation, I was prepared to make a stand, even if it meant causing the scene they were so desperate to avoid. The banquet hall was decorated elegantly with the Johnson family colours. A large screen at the front suggested a presentation was indeed planned, and tables were arranged with formal place cards. As Marcus and I entered, I immediately looked for our names among the place cards. To my dismay but not surprise, I found Amanda Johnson at a table near the front with other adult family members, while Marcus, no last name included, was relegated to a children's table at the very back of the room. Jessica approached, having noticed my expression. "What's wrong?" I showed her the place cards. "They've separated us, and they've removed his last name. He's just Marcus, while every other child is listed with full names." Jessica's face darkened. "That's deliberate and cruel. Do you want me to say something to them?" "No, I'll handle it." I took the place cards and walked directly to where my mother was overseeing the final table arrangements. "There seems to be a mistake with the seating," I said, keeping my voice level. She glanced at the cards in my hand. "No mistake. The children are at their own table and the adults are grouped by generation. It's more practical for conversation. And the fact that Marcus is the only person here without a last name on his card, is that also practical?" She at least had the grace to look uncomfortable. "An oversight, I'm sure." "I don't think it was," I said quietly. "But it doesn't matter. Marcus will be sitting with me, not at a separate table. Amanda, be reasonable. All the other children are sitting together. Marcus will be fine. Ethan and Lily will be with him. He's 8 years old and in a room full of strangers, many of whom have made it clear they don't consider him family. He stays with me." I took a pen from a nearby table and wrote Johnson after Marcus's first name on his card, then placed both our cards together at my assigned table. My mother pressed her lips together disapprovingly, but didn't argue further. She knew making a scene would be exactly what she was trying to avoid. Marcus, who had been examining the fancy centerpieces with fascination, rejoined me. "Mom, there's a chocolate fountain over there. Can I have some?" "After dinner, buddy. Let's find our seats first." As we settled at the table, I introduced Marcus to the relatives seated with us, my cousins Michael and Diane, and my father's sister, Aunt Catherine. They were polite, if not overly warm, and I felt Marcus pressing closer to my side, suddenly shy in the formal setting. "So Marcus," Aunt Catherine said, filling the awkward silence, "Amanda tells us you're interested in space. Are you going to be an astronaut when you grow up?" Marcus brightened at the mention of his favourite subject. "Maybe. Or maybe a scientist who studies black holes. Did you know black holes can swallow entire stars?" As he launched into an enthusiastic explanation of black holes, I watched Aunt Catherine's expression shift from polite interest to genuine engagement. By the time the appetizers were served, she was asking him thoughtful questions about his space book, and he was answering with growing confidence. Across the room, I could see my parents at the head table, my father occasionally glancing our way with a frown. Let him frown, I thought defiantly. Marcus was winning over the family one person at a time, simply by being his wonderful self. The dinner progressed through several courses, each more elaborate than the last. Marcus picked at the unfamiliar fancy foods, but no one seemed to mind, least of all Marcus himself, who was more interested in conversation than cuisine. Finally, as dessert was being served, my father stood and tapped his glass for attention. The room quieted expectantly. "Thank you all for coming to this long-overdue Johnson family reunion," he began in his practiced public speaking voice. "It's wonderful to see so many generations of our family gathered together to celebrate our shared heritage." There was polite applause. Marcus, who had been fidgeting in his chair, sat up straight at the mention of family heritage. "Tonight, my father continued, We have a special presentation about the Johnson family history, tracing our lineage back to our arrival in America in the 1850s. It's important for the younger generations especially to understand where they come from, to know the blood that runs in their veins. I felt Marcus stiffen beside me, his earlier excitement dimming. The emphasis on blood was unmistakable and unmistakably exclusionary. Before we begin the presentation, my father went on, I'd like to invite all the Johnson grandchildren to come to the front for a special family photo, a visual representation of our family's future. Children began making their way to the front of the room. Jessica caught my eye from her table and gave a small nod of encouragement. Go ahead, Marcus, I whispered. That includes you. He hesitated, looking uncertain, but Grandpa said blood family. You are family, I insisted gently. Go on, stand with your cousins. Reluctantly, he made his way to the front where about a dozen children were gathering. I saw my mother whisper something to my father, who frowned and shook his head sharply. Then, loud enough for everyone to hear, my father said, Just the Johnson grandchildren for this photo, please. The room went uncomfortably quiet. Marcus stood frozen at the edge of the group, his face flushing with confusion and embarrassment. Before I could react, Jessica's 7-year-old son, Ethan, called out, But Marcus is our cousin, Uncle Richard. He's Aunt Amanda's son. Yeah, Lily added, grabbing Marcus's hand and pulling him into the group. He belongs with us. Cheating. A murmur ran through the room. I stood up ready to go to Marcus to protect him from further humiliation. But before I could take a step, Aunt Catherine's voice rang out. Richard Johnson, what on earth do you think you're doing? My father turned, clearly surprised by the intervention from his usually quiet sister. Catherine, this is a family matter. Yes, it is, she agreed sharply. And that boy is family. I've spent the last hour talking with him, and he has more of the Johnson curiosity and intelligence than half the so-called blood relatives in this room. Catherine, you don't understand. I understand perfectly, she interrupted. You're being a prejudiced old fool. Your mother would be ashamed of you right now. The mention of my grandmother, who had passed away 5 years earlier, seemed to strike a nerve with my father. He opened and closed his mouth several times without speaking. In the silence, Marcus looked around uncertainly, then said in a small voice that somehow carried through the entire room, It's okay, I can go sit down if I'm not a real Johnson. The simplicity of his statement, the quiet dignity in his young voice, seemed to break something open in the room. Several relatives made sounds of protest. Of course you're a real Johnson, Rachel called out firmly. Come stand by Zoe, another cousin urged. You're as much a Johnson as any of us. And then, to my astonishment, my mother stepped forward. She looked at Marcus for what felt like the first time, really looked at him, not through him or past him. Marcus, she said, her voice wavering slightly, please join the other grandchildren for the photo. You belong there. My father stared at her in disbelief. Eleanor. Enough, Richard, she said quietly but firmly. Look at him. Really look at him. He's standing there with the same expression Amanda used to have when she thought we were disappointed in her. How can you not see it? It was true. Though Marcus didn't share my colouring or features, there was something in his expression, a particular tilt of the head, a certain way of holding himself, when uncertain, that mirrored my own childhood mannerisms perfectly. My father looked from my mother to Marcus, then to me. For a long moment no one spoke. Then with a barely perceptible nod he gestured to the photographer. All the grandchildren, he said, emphasising the word all in what seemed like a concession, for the Johnson family photo. Marcus looked at me questioningly. I nodded encouragement and he moved to join the other children standing between Ethan and Lily, who immediately put their arms around him protectively. As the photographer arranged the children and took several photos, I felt tears threatening. It wasn't a full acceptance, not yet. My father's reluctant inclusion wasn't the same as a warm embrace, but it was a start, a crack in the wall of prejudice he'd built. After the photos, as the children returned to their seats and my father prepared to start the family history presentation, Marcus slid back into his chair beside me. Was that okay, Mum? He whispered. Being in the picture, even though I'm not blood family, I hugged him close. That was perfect. And you are family blood isn't what makes a family love is. Never forget that. The presentation began a detailed slideshow about Johnson ancestors, their journey from Europe, their achievements in America. I worried it would further emphasize the blood lineage my parents valued so highly, but to my surprise, halfway through, my father departed from his prepared remarks. Family, he said, looking around the room, is more than shared DNA. It's shared values, shared experiences, shared love. The Johnson family has always adapted to changing times while holding on to our core principles of integrity, education, and care for one another. Perhaps it's time we recognized that our family can grow and change in new ways while still remaining true to those values. It wasn't an apology, and it wasn't a full acceptance of Marcus. But coming from my stubborn traditional father, it was a significant shift. After the presentation, as people mingled over dessert, my mother approached our table. She hesitated, then addressed Marcus directly. "I understand you have a book about space that you've been showing people," she said somewhat stiffly. "Your grandfather was quite interested in astronomy when he was younger. Perhaps you'd like to show him your book." Marcus looked at me uncertainly. I nodded encouragement, though I was as surprised as he was by this overture. "Okay," he agreed cautiously, retrieving his precious book from under his chair. "Where is he?" My mother led him to where my father stood talking with Uncle Frank. I watched from a distance as Marcus shyly offered the book, opening it to show his favorite pages about black holes. My father's posture remained stiff, but he bent slightly to look at the illustrations, and after a moment pointed to something on the page that made Marcus nod enthusiastically. It was a small interaction, awkward and tentative. It wasn't the warm grandparent relationship I had hoped Marcus would have. But it was something a beginning, perhaps, where before there had been only rejection. Jessica joined me, following my gaze to where Marcus was now animatedly explaining something to my increasingly attentive father. "Well, well," she murmured. "Will wonders never cease?" "Do you think they'll ever really accept him?" I asked softly. She considered this. "Fully, warmly, without reservation, I don't know. Maybe not in the way we would want. But they're making an effort right now, which is more than I expected from them tonight." "It shouldn't be this hard," I said, watching as my father actually smiled at something Marcus said. "He's just a child who wants to be loved." "You're right, it shouldn't be this hard," Jessica agreed. "But change rarely comes easy to people like Mom and Dad. The fact that they're trying at all is significant." As the evening drew to a close, Marcus returned to me with a thoughtful expression. "Grandpa knows a lot about space," he reported. "He said next time we visit, he'll show me his old telescope." "Next time we visit," I repeated, surprised. "That sounds nice." "He's still kind of weird with me," Marcus added perceptively. "Not like other grandpas, but he liked my book and he knew about black holes too." "People sometimes take time to get comfortable with new situations," I explained, choosing my words carefully. "But I'm really proud of how you handled yourself tonight. You were a true Johnson, smart, brave and kind." He beamed at the praise, then yawned widely. "Can we go home now? My fancy shoes are killing me." I laughed, the tension of the evening finally breaking. "Yes, we can go home. Those shoes have served their purpose." As we said our goodbyes, several relatives made a point of telling Marcus how nice it was to meet him, and that they hoped to see him at the next family gathering. My parents' farewell was more reserved, a formal handshake from my father, an awkward pat on the shoulder from my mother. But it was directed at Marcus himself, not through me, as if he were invisible. In the car driving home, Marcus fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted from the emotional day. I glanced at him in the rearview mirror, his head lolling against the seatbelt, his face peaceful in sleep. The reunion hadn't gone perfectly. There had been uncomfortable moments, hurtful exclusions, and awkward tensions. But there had also been unexpected allies, moments of connection, and perhaps the beginning of acceptance from my parents. Rome wasn't built in a day, and prejudices weren't dismantled in one family reunion. But we had taken a stand, shown the entire Johnson family that Marcus and I were a package deal, that he was my son in every way that mattered, and that no outdated notions of real family would change that. As I drove through the quiet night streets toward home, I felt a sense of cautious hope. The road ahead with my parents would likely still have bumps and setbacks. They might never fully embrace Marcus the way they embraced their other grandchildren. But tonight, they had taken a small step in the right direction. And sometimes a small step was enough to start a journey. The morning after the reunion, I woke to the smell of something burning. Rushing downstairs in my pajamas, I found Marcus in the kitchen, surrounded by eggshells and flour with smoke rising from the toaster. "Happy day after reunion breakfast," he announced proudly as I hurriedly unplugged the smoking toaster and opened a window. "I wanted to make you breakfast because you seemed sad last night." I looked at the disaster that was my kitchen, spilled milk, eggshells everywhere, burnt toast, and felt nothing but love for this thoughtful child. "Sad I wasn't sad, buddy," I said, helping him scrape a blackened piece of bread from the toaster. "You were quiet in the car and your eyes looked watery," he insisted. Was it because Grandpa and Grandma are still learning how to love me? His perceptiveness caught me off guard. You're pretty smart for an 8-year-old, you know that. He shrugged. Cousin Walter said I got the Johnson brains. I laughed, remembering Walter's comment from the picnic. He's right about that. Yes, I was a little sad about Grandpa and Grandma. I want them to see how amazing you are, and it hurts me when they don't. But they're trying now, right? He asked, his face serious. Grandpa said I could see his telescope. They are trying, I agreed, and that's a good start. We cleaned up the kitchen mess together and made a fresh breakfast, properly cooked eggs and non-burnt toast. As we ate, Marcus peppered me with questions about the relatives he'd met, trying to sort out who was related to whom and how. So Aunt Jessica is your sister, which makes her my aunt, and her kids are my cousins, and Uncle Michael is your cousin, which makes him my, second cousin, I supplied. Family relationships can get complicated, but they're all still my family, right? Even though I'm adopted. Absolutely, I said firmly. Adoption made you my son legally, but you were my son in my heart from the moment I first held you. And being my son makes you part of the entire extended family. He nodded, processing this. I liked having family. Ethan and Lily are fun, and Zoe showed me her rock collection, and Aunt Catherine told me funny stories about you when you were little. Oh no, I groaned theatrically. What did she tell you? That you got stuck in a tree once and the fire department had to come get you down. I was 7 and convinced I could climb as well as Jessica. I defended myself, smiling at the memory. Can we see them again soon? He asked hopefully. The family, I mean. I think that can be arranged, I said, touched by his eagerness, despite the mixed reception he'd received. Maybe we could have Ethan and Lily over for a playdate soon. And Grandpa and Grandma too. For the telescope. I hesitated. My parents had made a small gesture of inclusion at the reunion, but I wasn't ready to fully trust them with Marcus's tender heart yet. We'll see, I said neutrally. Let's give it a little time. He accepted this with a nod, then changed the subject to his plan for building a model solar system for his science project. Over the next few weeks, life returned to normal. Marcus went back to day camp, I returned to work, and the reunion faded into memory. We had a few playdates with Jessica's children, and Marcus spoke occasionally about the relatives he'd met, but there was no contact from my parents. Then about a month after the reunion, a package arrived addressed to Marcus Johnson, the full name clearly written in my father's precise handwriting. Inside was a telescope, not a toy one, but a real high-quality beginner's model. A card read simply, "For my grandson to explore the stars." Grandpa, Marcus was ecstatic. That night we set up the telescope in the backyard, and he spent hours gazing at the moon and stars, consulting his spacebook and making notes in a journal. 2 days later, my mother called. The conversation was stilted formal, but she asked specifically about Marcus, how he liked the telescope, how day camp was going, whether he was excited about returning to school. We thought, she said hesitantly near the end of the call, that perhaps you both might come for dinner next Sunday. If you're available. I was silent for so long that she prompted, Amanda, are you there? Yes, I said finally. We're available, but I need to be clear about something, Mother. If we come, it's as mother and son as family. I won't expose Marcus to any more suggestions that he doesn't fully belong. I understand, she said quietly. Your father and I have been doing some thinking since the reunion. Some soul-searching, you might say. We're not promising to get everything right immediately, but we are promising to try harder. It wasn't the full-throated acceptance I might have wished for, but it was honest. And perhaps honesty was a better foundation for building a relationship than false promises or forced enthusiasm. Sunday works for us, I agreed. Marcus will be excited about showing Grandpa what he's learned about astronomy. The dinner was awkward, but not disastrous. My parents made visible efforts to engage with Marcus, asking about his interests, and actually listening to his answers. My father spent nearly an hour discussing stars and planets with him, showing a patience I rarely saw him exhibit. There were still moments of stiffness, still a reserve, that my parents didn't show with Jessica's children. But there was also genuine effort, and for now that was enough. As Marcus and I drove home that evening, he said thoughtfully, Grandma and Grandpa are getting better at being grandparents, I think. Yes, I agreed. I think they are. It's because they're finally seeing me. He stated with the simple wisdom of children. Before they were looking at me, but not seeing me. Hey, say, I glanced at him in the rearview mirror, this extraordinary child who had come into my life and changed it immeasurably for the better. You're pretty wise for an 8-year-old, you know that. He grinned, revealing the gap where a new tooth was growing in. That's because I have the best mum who teaches me important stuff. Over the following months, we established a routine of Sunday dinners with my parents twice a month. Each visit became a little less strained, a little more natural. My father taught Marcus to play chess. My mother discovered he loved baking and began teaching him family recipes. They still weren't the warm, doting grandparents I had envisioned for my child. There was still a reserve, still moments of awkwardness. But they were trying, learning, growing, proving that even deeply ingrained prejudices could be overcome with time and exposure. One Sunday, nearly 6 months after the reunion, I arrived to pick up Marcus from an afternoon at my parents' house and found him sitting at the kitchen table with my mother looking through old photo albums. "Mom," he called excitedly, "Grandma's showing me pictures of you when you were my age. You had braces and they looked weird." "Thanks for that, Marcus." I laughed, joining them at the table. My mother smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. "He wanted to know if he looks like you did at his age." I was showing him that while you don't look alike physically, you both have the same expressions, the same way of tilting your head when you're curious about something. I stared at her, surprised by this observation, the same one she had made at the reunion, that had seemed to shift something in her perspective. "What?" she asked, noticing my expression. "Nothing," I said. "It's just nice to hear you acknowledge the similarities between us, not just the differences." So she looked down at the photo album, running her finger over a picture of me at 8 years old. "I've been doing a lot of thinking these past months, Amanda. About family, about what it means to be a grandmother. I haven't always gotten it right, I know that, but I'm learning." "We both are," my father said, entering the kitchen and placing his hand on Marcus's shoulder, a casual gesture of affection that would have been unthinkable 6 months earlier. "And this young man is a very patient teacher." Marcus beamed at the compliment. "Can I show Mom the chess move you taught me, Grandpa?" "Absolutely." The board still set up in the den. As Marcus led my father away, chattering about knights and bishops, my mother closed the photo album. "He's a remarkable child," she said quietly. "I'm sorry it took us so long to see that." "He is remarkable," I agreed. "Thank you for finally seeing him." "Yay." She nodded, and for a moment I saw regret in her eyes, for the time wasted, for the love withheld. But then she smiled and said, "We're having a small gathering for your father's birthday next month. Family only. We'd like Marcus to sit at the head table with us, with the immediate family." It was a small gesture, but a significant one. A public acknowledgement that Marcus wasn't just my son, but their grandson, a full member of the Johnson family. "He'd like that," I said simply. We both would. As we drove home later with Marcus, half asleep in the back seat, clutching a chess piece his grandfather had given him as a gift, I reflected on the journey we'd taken since that first reunion invitation arrived. The road hadn't been smooth. There had been hurt feelings, heated words, and painful rejections. My parents weren't perfect grandparents now, and they might never fully shed all their traditional notions about family and bloodlines. But they were trying. They were growing. They were learning to see Marcus for who he truly was. Not an adopted child, not an outsider, but a bright, loving boy who happened to become part of our family through a different path. And in their efforts, imperfect as they were, I found hope that love could indeed transcend biology, that family could be defined by choice as much as by blood, and that even the most deeply held prejudices could be overcome when confronted with the simple, undeniable humanity of a child who just wanted to belong. Marcus Johnson was my son-in-law in heart, in every way that mattered. And slowly but surely, he was becoming a Johnson in the eyes of the entire family as well. What do you think about how I stood up for my son against my parents' prejudice? Have you ever had to defend someone you love against unfair treatment? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments. And if this story touched your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories about family love and standing up for what's right. Thank you for listening, and remember, family isn't defined by blood, but by love.